Part 50. Since the nuns were busy from morning till night with 100 duties, Kitty saw little of them but at the services in the bare, humble chapel. On her first day the Mother Superior, catching sight of her seated at the back behind the girls on the benches according to their ages, stopped and spoke to her. "You must not think it necessary for you to come to the chapel when we do," she said. "You are a Protestant and you have your own convictions. But I like to come, Mother. I find that it rests me." The Mother Superior gave her a moment's glance and slightly inclined her grave head. "Of course you will do exactly as you choose. I merely wanted you to understand that you are under no obligation." But with Sister St. Joseph Kitty soon became on terms not of intimacy, perhaps, but of familiarity. The economy of the convent was in her charge, and to look after the material well-being of that big family kept the sister on her feet all day. She said that the only time she had to rest was that which she devoted to prayer. But it pleased her towards evening, when Kitty was with the girls at their work, to come in and, vowing that she was tired out and had not a moment to spare, sit down for a few minutes and gossip. When she was not in the presence of the Mother Superior she was a talkative, merry creature, fond of a joke, and she did not dislike a bit of scandal. Kitty stood in no fear of her. Her habit did not prevent Sister St. Joseph from being a good-natured, homely woman, and she chattered with her gaily. She did not mind with her showing how badly she talked French, and they laughed with one another over Kitty's mistakes. The sister taught her every day a few useful words of Chinese. She was a farmer's daughter and at heart she was still a peasant. "I used to keep the cows when I was little," she said, "like Saint Joan of Arc. But I was too wicked to have visions. It was fortunate, I think. For my father would certainly have whipped me if I had. He used often to whip me, the good old man, for I was a very naughty little girl. I am ashamed sometimes when I think now of the pranks I used to play." Kitty laughed at the thought that this corpulent, middle-aged nun could ever have been a wayward child. And yet there was something childlike in her still, so that your heart went out to her. She seemed to have about her an aroma of the countryside in autumn, when the apple trees are laden with fruit and the crops are in and safely housed. She had not the tragic and austere saintliness of the Mother Superior, but a gaiety that was simple and happy. "Do you never wish to go home again, _Masoer_?" asked Kitty. "Oh, no. It would be too hard to come back. I love to be here, and I am never so happy as when I am among the orphans. They're so good, they're so grateful. But it is all very well to be a nun, _on a beau être religieuse_, still one has a mother, and one cannot forget that one drank the milk of her breasts. She is old, my mother, and it is hard never to see her again, but then she is fond of her daughter-in-law, and my brother is good to her. His son is growing up now. I should think they will be glad of an extra pair of strong arms on the farm. He was only a child when I left France, but he promised to have a fist that you could fell an ox with." It was almost impossible in that quiet room, listening to the nun, to realize that on the other side of these four walls cholera was raging. Sister St. Joseph had an unconcern which conveyed itself to Kitty. She had a naive curiosity about the world and its inhabitants. She asked Kitty all kinds of questions about London and England, a country, she thought, where so thick was the fog that you could not see your hand at midday, and she wanted to know if Kitty went to balls and whether she lived in a grand house and how many brothers and sisters she had. She spoke often of Walter. The Mother Superior said he was wonderful, and every day they prayed for him. How lucky Kitty was to have a husband who was so good and so brave and so clever. Part 51. But sooner or later Sister Saint Joseph returned to the subject of the Mother Superior. Kitty had been conscious from the beginning that the personality of this woman dominated the convent. She was regarded by all that dwelt there with love certainly and with admiration, but also with awe and not a little dread. Notwithstanding her kindliness, Kitty herself felt like a schoolgirl in her presence. She was never quite at her ease with her, for she was filled with a sentiment which was so strange that it embarrassed her reverence. Sister Saint Joseph, with an ingenious desire to impress, told Kitty how great the family was to which the Mother Superior belonged. She had among her ancestors persons of historic importance, and she was un peu cousine with half the kings in Europe. Alfonso of Spain had hunted at her father's, and they had chateaux all over France. It must have been hard to leave so much grandeur. Kitty listened smilingly, but not a little impressed. Du rest you have only to look at her, said the sister, to see that, comme famille, c'est le deshes du panier . She has the most beautiful hands that I have ever seen, said Kitty. Ah, but if you only knew how she had used them. She is not afraid of work, notre bonne mère . When they had come to the city there had been nothing. They had built the convent. The Mother Superior had made the plans and supervised the work. The moment they arrived they began to save the poor little unwanted girls from the baby tower and the cruel hands of the midwife. At first they had had no beds to sleep in and no glass to keep out the night air, and there is nothing, said Sister Saint Joseph, which is more unwholesome, and often they had no money left, not only to pay the builders, but even to buy their simple fare. They lived like peasants. What was she saying? The peasants in France, the men who worked for her father, would have thrown to the pigs the food they ate. And then the Mother Superior would collect her daughters round her. And they would kneel and pray, and the Blessed Virgin would send money. 1,000 francs would arrive by post next day, or a stranger, an Englishman, a Protestant, if you please, or even a Chinaman would knock at the door while they were actually on their knees and bring them a present. Once they were in such straits that they all made a vow to the Blessed Virgin that they would recite a_9_ in her honor if she succored them, and, would you believe it? That funny Mr. Waddington came to see us next day, and saying that we looked as though we all wanted a good plate of roast beef, gave us $100. What a comic little man he was, with his bald head and his little shrewd eyes, _ses petits yeux malins _ and his jokes, _mon Dieu _ how he murdered the French language, and yet you could not help laughing at him. He was always in a good humor. All through this terrible epidemic, he carried himself as if he were enjoying a holiday. He had a heart quite French and a wit so that you would hardly believe he was English, except for his accent. But sometimes Sister Saint Joseph thought he spoke badly on purpose to make you laugh. Of course his morals were not all one could wish, but still that was his business, with a sigh, a shrug, and a shake of the head, and he was a bachelor and a young man. What is wrong with his morals, ma soeur? Asked Kitty, smiling. Is it possible that you do not know? It is a sin for me to tell you. I have no business to say such things. He lives with a Chinese woman, that is to say, not a Chinese woman, but a Manchu. A princess, it appears. And she loves him to distraction. That sounds quite impossible, cried Kitty. No, no, I promise you, It is everything that is most true. It is very wicked of him. Those things are not done. Did you not hear, when you first came to the convent, and he would not eat the madeleines that I had made expressly, that Notre Bonne Mère said his stomach was deranged by Manchu cooking? That was what she meant, and you should have seen the head that he made. It is a story altogether curious. It appears that he was stationed at Hankow during the revolution when they were massacring the Manchus, and this good little Waddington saved the lives of one of their great families. They are related to the imperial family. The girl fell violently in love with him, and well, the rest you can imagine. And then when he left Hankow she ran away and followed him, and now she follows him everywhere, and he has had to resign himself to keep her, poor fellow, and I dare say he is very fond of her. They are quite charming sometimes, these Manchu women. But what am I thinking of? I have 1,000 things to do, and I sit here. I am a bad religious. I am ashamed of myself. Part 52. Kitty had a queer feeling that she was growing. The constant occupation distracted her mind, and the glimpses she had of other lives and other outlooks awakened her imagination. She began to regain her spirits, she felt better and stronger. It had seemed to her that she could do nothing now but weep, but to her surprise, and not a little to her confusion, she caught herself laughing at this and that. It began to seem quite natural to live in the midst of a terrible epidemic. She knew that people were dying to the right and left of her, but she ceased very much to think of it. The Mother Superior had forbidden her to go into the infirmaries, and the closed doors excited her curiosity. She would have liked to peep in, but could not do so without being seen, and she did not know what punishment the Mother Superior would inflict upon her. It would be dreadful to be sent away. She was devoted to the children now, and they would miss her if she went. In fact, she did not know what they would do without her. And one day it occurred to her that she had neither thought of Charles Townsend nor dreamt of him for a week. Her heart gave a sudden thud against her ribs. She was cured. She could think of him now with indifference. She loved him no longer. Oh, the relief, and the sense of liberation! It was strange to look back and remember how passionately she had yearned for him. She thought she would die when he failed her. She thought life thenceforward had nothing to offer but misery. And now, already she was laughing. A worthless creature. What a fool she had made of herself. And now, considering him calmly, she wondered what on earth she had seen in him. It was lucky that Waddington knew nothing. She could never have endured his malicious eyeing and his ironical innuendos. She was free, free at last, free. She could hardly prevent herself from laughing aloud. The children were playing some romping game, and it was her habit to look on with an indulgent smile, restraining them when they made too much noise and taking care that in their boisterousness none was hurt. But now, in her high spirits, feeling as young as any of them, she joined in the game. The little girls received her with delight. They chased up and down the room, shouting at the top of their shrill voices, with fantastic and almost barbarous glee. They grew so excited that they leaped into the air with joy. The noise was terrific. Suddenly the door opened and the Mother Superior stood on the threshold. Kitty, abashed, extricated herself from the clutches of a dozen little girls who with wild shrieks had seized her. "Is this how you keep these children good and quiet?" asked the Mother Superior, a smile on her lips. "We were having a game, Mother. They got excited. It is my fault, I led them on." The Mother Superior came forward, and as usual the children clustered about her. She put her hands round their narrow shoulders and playfully pulled their little yellow ears. She looked at Kitty with a long, soft look. Kitty was flushed and she was breathing quickly. Her liquid eyes were shining and her lovely hair, disarranged in all the struggling and the laughter, was in adorable confusion. Que vous êtes belle, ma chère enfant said the Mother Superior. It does the heart good to look at you. No wonder these children adore you. Kitty blushed deeply and, she knew not why, tears suddenly filled her eyes. She covered her face with her hands. Oh, Mother, you make me ashamed. Come, do not be silly. Beauty is also a gift of God, one of the most rare and precious, and we should be thankful if we are happy enough to possess it, and thankful, if we are not, that others possess it for our pleasure. She smiled again, and as though Kitty were a child too, gently patted her soft cheek. Part 53. Since she had been working at the convent, Kitty had seen less of Waddington. 2 or 3 times he had come down to the river bank to meet her, and they had walked up the hill together. He came in to drink a whiskey and soda, but he would seldom stay to dinner. One Sunday, however, he suggested that they should take their luncheon with them and go in chairs to a Buddhist monastery. It was situated 10 miles from the city and had some reputation as a place of pilgrimage. The Mother Superior, insisting that Kitty must have a day's rest, would not let her work on Sundays, and Walter of course was as busy then as usual. They started early in order to arrive before the heat of the day, and were carried along a narrow causeway between the rice fields. Now and then they passed comfortable farmhouses nestling with friendly intimacy in a grove of bamboos. Kitty enjoyed the idleness. It was pleasant after being cooped up in the city to see about her the wide country. They came to the monastery, straggling low buildings by the side of the river, agreeably shaded by trees, and were led by smiling monks through courtyards, empty with a solemn emptiness, and shown temples with grimacing gods. In the sanctuary sat the Buddha, remote and sad, wistful, abstracted, and faintly smiling. There was about everything a sense of dejection. The magnificence was shoddy and ruined, the gods were dusty, and the faith that had made them was dying. The monks seemed to stay on sufferance, as though they awaited a notice to quit, and in the smile of the abbot, with his beautiful politeness, was the irony of resignation. One of these days the monks would wander away from the shady, pleasant wood, and the buildings, crumbling and neglected, would be battered by fierce storms and besieged by the surrounding nature. Wild creepers would twine themselves about the dead images, and trees would grow in the courtyards. Then the gods would dwell there no longer, but evil spirits of darkness. Part 54. They sat on the steps of a little building, 4 lacquered columns and a high, tiled roof under which stood a great bronze bell, and watched the river flow sluggish and with many a bend towards the stricken city. They could see its crenellated walls. The heat hung over it like a pall. But the river, though it flowed so slowly, had still a sense of movement, and it gave one a melancholy feeling of the transitoriness of things. Everything passed, and what trace of its passage remained? It seemed to Kitty that they were all, the human race, like the drops of water in that river, and they flowed on, each so close to the other and yet so far apart, a nameless flood, to the sea. When all things lasted so short a time and nothing mattered very much, it seemed pitiful that men, attaching an absurd importance to trivial objects, should make themselves and one another so unhappy. Do you know Harrington Gardens, she asked Waddington, with a smile in her beautiful eyes. No. Why? Nothing, only it's a long way from here. It's where my people live. Are you thinking of going home? No. I suppose you'll be leaving here in a couple of months. The epidemic seems to be abating and the cool weather should see the end of it. I almost think I shall be sorry to go. For a moment she thought of the future. She did not know what plans Walter had in mind. He told her nothing. He was cool, polite, silent and inscrutable. Two little drops in that river that flowed silently towards the unknown, two little drops that to themselves had so much individuality and to the onlooker were but an undistinguishable part of the water. Take care the nuns don't start converting you, said Waddington, with his malicious little smile. They're much too busy. Nor do they care. They're wonderful and so kind. And yet I hardly know how to explain it. There is a wall between them and me. I don't know what it is. It is as though they possessed a secret which made all the difference in their lives and which I was unworthy to share. It is not faith, it is something deeper and more significant. They walk in a different world from ours and we shall always be strangers to them. Each day when the convent door closes behind me I feel that for them I have ceased to exist. I can understand that it is something of a blow to your vanity, he returned mockingly. My vanity? Kitty shrugged her shoulders. Then, smiling once more, she turned to him lazily. Why did you never tell me that you lived with a Manchu princess? What have those gossiping old women been telling you? I am sure that it is a sin for nuns to discuss the private affairs of the customs officials. Why should you be so sensitive? Waddington glanced down, sideways, so that it gave him an air of shyness. He faintly shrugged his shoulders. It's not a thing to advertise. I do not know that it would greatly add to my chances of promotion in the service. Are you very fond of her? He looked up now and his ugly little face had the look of a naughty schoolboy's. She's abandoned everything for my sake, home, family, security and self-respect. It's a good many years now since she threw everything to the winds to be with me. I've sent her away 2 or 3 times, but she's always come back. I've run away from her myself, but she's always followed me. And now I've given it up as a bad job. I think I've got to put up with her for the rest of my life. She must really love you to distraction. It's a rather funny sensation, you know, he answered, wrinkling a perplexed forehead. I haven't the smallest doubt that if I really left her, definitely, she would commit suicide. Not with any ill feeling towards me, but quite naturally, because she was unwilling to live without me. It is a curious feeling it gives one to know that it can't help meaning something to you. But it's loving that's the important thing, not being loved. One's not even grateful to the people who love one. If one doesn't love them, they only bore one. I have no experience of the plural, he replied. Mine is only in the singular. Is she really an imperial princess? No, that is a romantic exaggeration of the nuns. She belongs to one of the great families of the Manchus, but they have, of course, been ruined by the revolution. She is all the same a very great lady. He said it in a tone of pride, so that a smile flickered in Kitty's eyes. Are you going to stay here for the rest of your life then? In China? Yes. What would she do elsewhere? When I retire I shall take a little Chinese house in Peking and spend the rest of my days there. Have you any children? No. She looked at him curiously. It was strange that this little bald-headed Man with his monkey face should have aroused in the alien woman so devastating a passion. She could not tell why the way he spoke of her, notwithstanding his casual manner and his flippant phrases, gave her the impression so strongly of the woman's intense and unique devotion. It troubled her a little. It does seem a long way to Harrington Gardens, she smiled. Why do you say that? I don't understand anything. Life is so strange. I feel like someone who's lived all his life by a duck pond and suddenly is shown the sea. It makes me a little breathless, and yet it fills me with elation. I don't want to die, I want to live. I'm beginning to feel a new courage. I feel like one of those old sailors who set sail for undiscovered seas. And I think my soul hankers for the unknown. Waddington looked at her reflectively. Her abstracted gaze rested on the smoothness of the river. Two little drops that flowed silently, silently, towards the dark, eternal sea. May I come and see the Manchu lady? Asked Kitty, suddenly raising her head. She can't speak a word of English. You've been very kind to me, you've done a great deal for me, perhaps I could show her by my manner that I had a friendly feeling towards her. Waddington gave a thin, mocking little smile, but he answered with good humor. I will come and fetch you one day and she shall give you a cup of jasmine tea. She would not tell him that the story of an alien love had from the first moment strangely intrigued her fancy, and the Manchu princess stood now as the symbol of something that vaguely, but insistently, beckoned to her. She pointed enigmatically to a mystic land of the spirit. Part 55. But a day or two later Kitty made an unforeseen discovery. She went to the convent as usual and set about her first work of seeing that the children were washed and dressed. Since the nuns held firmly that the night air was harmful, the atmosphere in the dormitory was close and fetid. After the freshness of the morning it always made Kitty a little uncomfortable and she hastened to open such windows as would. But today she felt on a sudden desperately sick and with her head swimming she stood at a window trying to compose herself. It had never been as bad as this before. Then nausea overwhelmed her and she vomited. She gave a cry so that the children were frightened, and the older girl who was helping her ran up and, seeing Kitty white and trembling, stopped short with an exclamation. Cholera! The thought flashed through Kitty's mind and then a death-like feeling came over her. She was seized with terror. She struggled for a moment against the night that seemed agonizingly to run through her veins. She felt horribly ill, and then darkness. When she opened her eyes she did not at first know where she was. She seemed to be lying on the floor and, moving her head slightly, she thought that there was a pillow under it. She could not remember. The Mother Superior was kneeling by her side, holding smelling salts to her nose, and Sister St. Joseph stood looking at her. Then it came back. Cholera. She saw the consternation on the nuns' faces. Sister St. Joseph looked huge and her outline was blurred. Once more terror overwhelmed her. Oh, mother, mother, she sobbed. Am I going to die? I don't want to die. Of course you're not going to die, said the Mother Superior. She was quite composed and there was even amusement in her eyes. But it's cholera. Where's Walter? Has he been sent for? Oh, mother! Mother! She burst into a flood of tears. The Mother Superior gave her hand and Kitty seized it as though it were a hold upon the life she feared to lose. Come, come, my dear child, you mustn't be so silly. It's not cholera or anything of the kind. Where's Walter? Your husband is much too busy to be troubled. In 5 minutes you'll be perfectly well. Kitty looked at her with staring, harassed eyes. Why did she take it so calmly? It was cruel. Keep perfectly quiet for a minute, said the Mother Superior. There is nothing to alarm yourself about. Kitty felt her heart beat madly. She had grown so used to the thought of cholera that it had ceased to seem possible that she could catch it. Oh, the fool she had been. She knew she was going to die. She was frightened. The girls brought in a long rattan chair and placed it by the window. Come, let us lift you, said the Mother Superior. You will be more comfortable on the chaise long. Do you think you can stand? She put her hands under Kitty's arms and Sister St. Joseph helped her to her feet. She sank exhausted into the chair. I had better shut the window, said Sister St. Joseph. The early morning air cannot be good for her. No, no, said Kitty. Please leave it open. It gave her confidence to see the blue sky. She was shaken, but certainly she began to feel better. The two nuns looked at her for a moment in silence, and Sister St. Joseph said something to the Mother Superior which she could not understand. Then the Mother Superior sat on the side of the chair and took her hand. Listen, ma chère enfant. She asked her one or two questions. Kitty answered them without knowing what they meant. Her lips were trembling so that she could hardly frame the words. There is no doubt about it, said Sister St. Joseph. I am not one to be deceived in such a matter. She gave a little laugh in which Kitty seemed to discern a certain excitement and not a little affection. The Mother Superior, still holding Kitty's hand, smiled with soft tenderness. Sister St. Joseph has more experience of these things than I have, dear child, and she said at once what was the matter with you. She was evidently quite right. What do you mean? Asked Kitty anxiously. It is quite evident. Did the possibility of such a thing never occur to you? You are with child, my dear. The start that Kitty gave shook her from head to foot, and she put her feet to the ground as though to spring up. Lie still, said the Mother Superior. Kitty felt herself blush furiously and she put her hands to her breasts. It's impossible. It isn't true. _QSCEQL did, asked Sister St. Joseph. The Mother Superior translated. Sister St. Joseph's broad simple face, with its red cheeks, was beaming. No mistake is possible. I give you my word of honor. How long have you been married, my child? Asked the Mother Superior. Why, when my sister-in-law had been married as long as you she had already 2 babies. Kitty sank back into the chair. There was death in her heart. I'm so ashamed, she whispered. Because you are going to have a baby? Why, what can be more natural? Quelle joie pour le docteur said Sister St. Joseph. Yes, think what a happiness for your husband. He will be overwhelmed with joy. You have only to see him with babies, and the look on his face when he plays with them, to see how enchanted he will be to have one of his own. For a little while Kitty was silent. The 2 nuns looked at her with tender interest and the Mother Superior stroked her hand. It was silly of me not to have suspected it before, said Kitty. At all events I'm glad it's not cholera. I feel very much better. I will get back to my work. Not today, my dear child. You have had a shock, you had much better go home and rest yourself. No, I would much rather stay and work. I insist. What would our good doctor say if I let you be imprudent? Come tomorrow, if you like, or the day after, but today you must be quiet. I will send for a chair. Would you like me to let one of our young girls go with you? Oh, no, I shall be all right alone. Part 56. Kitty was lying on her bed and the shutters were closed. It was after luncheon and the servants slept. What she had learnt that morning, and now she was certain that it was true, filled her with consternation. Ever since she came home she had been trying to think, but her mind was a blank, and she could not collect her thoughts. Suddenly she heard a step. The feet were booted so that it could not be one of the boys. With a gasp of apprehension she realized that it could only be her husband. He was in the sitting room and she heard herself called. She did not reply. There was a moment's silence and then a knock on her door. Yes. May I come in? Kitty rose from her bed and slipped into a dressing gown. Yes. He entered. She was glad that the closed shutters shadowed her face. I hope I didn't wake you. I knocked very, very gently. I haven't been asleep. He went to one of the windows and threw open the shutter. A flood of warm light streamed into the room. What is it? She asked. Why are you back so early? The sisters said that you weren't very well. I thought I had better come and see what was the matter. A flash of anger passed through her. What would you have said if it had been cholera? If it had been you certainly couldn't have made your way home this morning. She went to the dressing table and passed the comb through her shingled hair. She wanted to gain time. Then, sitting down, she lit a cigarette. I wasn't very well this morning and the Mother Superior thought I'd better come back here. But I'm perfectly all right again. I shall go to the convent as usual tomorrow. What was the matter with you? Didn't they tell you? No. The Mother Superior said that you must tell me yourself. He did now what he did seldom, he looked her full in the face. His professional instincts were stronger than his personal. She hesitated. Then she forced herself to meet his eyes. I'm going to have a baby, she said. She was accustomed to his habit of meeting with silence a statement which you would naturally expect to evoke an exclamation, but never had. It seemed to her more devastating. He said nothing, he made no gesture. No movement on his face nor change of expression in his dark eyes indicated that he had heard. She felt suddenly inclined to cry. If a man loved his wife and his wife loved him, at such a moment they were drawn together by a poignant emotion. The silence was intolerable and she broke it. I don't know why it never occurred to me before. It was stupid of me. But what with one thing and another? How long have you? When do you expect to be confined? The words seemed to issue from his lips with difficulty. She felt that his throat was as dry as hers. It was a nuisance that her lips trembled. So when she spoke, if he was not of stone it must excite his pity. I suppose I've been like this between 2 and 3 months. Am I the father? She gave a little gasp. There was just a shadow of a tremor in his voice. It was dreadful, that cold self-control of his which made the smallest token of emotion so shattering. She did not know why she thought suddenly of an instrument she had been shown in Chingyen upon which a needle oscillated a little, and she had been told that this represented an earthquake 1,000 miles away in which perhaps 1,000 persons had lost their lives. She looked at him. He was ghastly pale. She had seen that pallor on him once, twice before. He was looking down, a little sideways. Well. She clasped her hands. She knew that if she could say yes it would mean everything in the world to him. He would believe her, of course he would believe her, because he wanted to, and then he would forgive. She knew how deep was his tenderness and how ready he was, for all his shyness, to expend it. She knew that he was not vindictive, he would forgive her. If she could but give him an excuse that touched his heart, and he would forgive completely. She could count on him never to throw the past in her teeth. Cruel he might be, cold and morbid, but he was neither mean nor petty. It would alter everything if she said yes. And she had an urgent need for sympathy. The unexpected knowledge that she was with child had overwhelmed her with strange hopes and unforeseen desires. She felt weak, frightened a little, alone and very far from any friends. That morning, though she cared little for her mother, she had a sudden craving to be with her. She needed help and consolation. She did not love Walter, she knew that she never could, but at this moment she longed with all her heart for him to take her in his arms so that she could lay her head on his breast, clinging to him she could have cried happily, she wanted him to kiss her and she wanted to twine her arms around his neck. She began to weep. She had lied so much and she could lie so easily. What could a lie matter when it could only do good? A lie, what was a lie? It was so easy to say yes. She saw Walter's eyes melt and his arms outstretched towards her. She couldn't say it, she didn't know why. She just couldn't. All she had gone through during these bitter weeks. Charlie and his unkindness, the cholera, and all these people dying, the nuns, oddly enough even that funny, drunken little Waddington, it all seemed to have changed her so that she did not know herself, though she was so deeply moved, some bystander in her soul seemed to watch her with terror and surprise. She had to tell the truth. It did not seem worth while to lie. Her thoughts wandered strangely. On a sudden she saw that dead beggar at the foot of the compound wall. Why should she think of him? She did not sob, the tears streamed down her face, quite easily, from wide eyes. At last she answered the question. He had asked her if he was the child's father. I don't know, she said. He gave the ghost of a chuckle. It made Kitty shudder. It's a bit awkward, isn't it? His answer was characteristic, it was exactly what she would have expected him to say, but it made her heart sink. She wondered if he realized how hard it had been for her to tell the truth. At the same moment she recognized that it had not been in the least hard, but inevitable, and if he gave her credit for it. Her answer, I don't know. I don't know hammered away in her head. It was impossible now to take it back. She got her handkerchief from her bag and dried her eyes. They did not speak. There was a siphon on the table by her bed and he got her a glass of water. He brought it to her and held the glass while she drank. She noticed how thin his hand was. It was a fine hand, slender, with long fingers, but now it was nothing but skin and bone. It trembled a little. He could control his face, but his hand betrayed him. Don't mind my crying, she said. It's nothing really, it's only that I can't help the water running out of my eyes. She drank the water and he put the glass back. He sat down on a chair and lit a cigarette. He gave a little sigh. Once or twice before she had heard him sigh like that, and it always gave her a catch at the heart. Looking at him now, for he was staring with abstracted gaze out of the window, she was surprised that she had not noticed before how terribly thin he had grown during the last weeks. His temples were sunken and the bones of his face showed through the skin. His clothes hung on him loosely as though they had been made for a larger man. Through his sunburn his face had a greenish pallor. He looked exhausted. He was working too hard, sleeping little and eating nothing. In her own grief and perturbation she found room to pity him. It was cruel to think that she could do nothing for him. He put his hand over his forehead, as though his head were aching, and she had a feeling that in his brain too those words hammered madly, I don't know, I don't know. It was strange that this moody, cold and shy man should have such a natural affection for very little babies. Most men didn't care much even for their own, but the nuns, touched and a little amused, had more than once spoken of it. If he felt like that about those funny little Chinese babies, what would he have felt about his own? Kitty bit her lips in order to prevent herself from crying. Again he looked at his watch. I'm afraid I must go back to the city. I have a great deal to do today. Shall you be all right? Oh, yes. Don't bother about me. I think you'd better not wait for me this evening. I may be very late. And I'll get something to eat from Colonel Yu. Very well. He rose. If I were you, I wouldn't try to do anything today. You'd better take it easy. Is there anything you want before I go? No, thanks. I shall be quite all right. He paused for an instant, as though he were undecided, and then, abruptly and without looking at her, took his hat and walked out of the room. She heard him go through the compound. She felt terribly alone. There was no need for self-restraint now, and she gave herself up to a passion of tears. Part 57. The night was sultry and Kitty sat at the window looking at the fantastic roofs, dark against the starlight, of the Chinese temple, when at last Walter came in. Her eyes were heavy with weeping, but she was composed. Notwithstanding all there was to harass her, she felt, perhaps only from exhaustion, strangely at peace. I thought you'd be already in bed, said Walter as he came in. I wasn't sleepy. I thought it cooler to sit up. Have you had any dinner? All I want. He walked up and down the long room and she saw that he had something to say to her. She knew that he was embarrassed. Without concern she waited for him to summon up his resolution. He began abruptly. I've been thinking about what you told me this afternoon. It seems to me that it would be better if you went away. I have spoken to Colonel Yu and he will give you an escort. You could take the Amma with you. You will be quite safe. Where is there for me to go? You can go to your mother's. Do you think she would be pleased to see me? He paused for a moment, hesitating, as though for reflection. Then you can go to Qingyan. What should I do there? You will need a good deal of care and attention. I don't think it's fair to ask you to stay here. She could not prevent the smile, not only of bitterness but of frank amusement, that crossed her face. She gave him a glance and very nearly laughed. I don't know why you should be so anxious about my health. He came over to the window and stood looking out at the night. There had never been so many stars in the unclouded sky. This isn't the place for a woman in your condition. She looked at him, white in his thin clothes against the darkness. There was something sinister in his fine profile, and yet oddly enough at this moment it excited in her no fear. When you insisted on my coming here, did you want it to kill me? She asked suddenly. He was so long answering that she thought he had refused to hear. At first, she gave a little shudder, for it was the first time he had admitted his intention. But she bore him no ill will for it. Her feeling surprised herself, there was a certain admiration in it and a faint amusement. She did not quite know why, but suddenly thinking of Charlie Townsend, he seemed to her an abject fool. It was a terrible risk you were taking, she answered. With your sensitive conscience, I wonder if you could ever have forgiven yourself. If I had died. Well, you haven't. You've thrived on it? I've never felt better in my life. She had an instinct to throw herself on the mercy of his humor. After all they had gone through, when they were living amid these scenes of horror and desolation, it seemed inept to attach importance to the ridiculous act of fornication. When death stood round the corner, taking lives like a gardener digging up potatoes, it was foolishness to care what dirty things this person or that did with his body. If she could only make him realize how little Charlie meant to her, so that now already she had difficulty in calling up his features to her imagination, and how entirely the love of him had passed out of her heart. Because she had no feeling for Townsend, the various acts she had committed with him had lost their significance. She had regained her heart, and what she had given of her body seemed not to matter a rap. She was inclined to say to Walter, "Look here, don't you think we've been silly long enough? We've sulked with one another like children. Why can't we kiss and be friends? There's no reason why we shouldn't be friends just because we're not lovers." He stood very still, and the lamplight made the pallor of his impassive face startling. She did not trust him. If she said the wrong thing, he would turn upon her with such an icy sternness. She knew by now his extreme sensitiveness, for which his acid irony was a protection, and how quickly he could close his heart if his feelings were hurt. She had a moment's irritation at his stupidity. Surely what troubled him most was the wound to his vanity. She vaguely realized that this is the hardest of all wounds to heal. It was singular that men attached so much importance to their wives' faithfulness. When first she had gone with Charlie, she had expected to feel quite different, a changed woman, but she had seemed to herself exactly the same. She had experienced only well-being and a greater vitality. She wished now that she had been able to tell Walter that the child was his. The lie would have meant so little to her, and the assurance would have been so great a comfort to him. And after all, it might not be a lie. It was funny, that something in her heart which had prevented her from giving herself the benefit of the doubt. How silly men were! Their part in procreation was so unimportant. It was the woman who carried the child through long months of uneasiness and bore it with pain, and yet a man, because of his momentary connection, made such preposterous claims. Why should that make any difference to him in his feeling towards the child? Then Kitty's thoughts wandered to the child which she herself would bear. She thought of it not with emotion nor with a passion of maternity, but with an idle curiosity. "I dare say you'd like to think it over a little," said Walter, breaking the long silence. "Think what?" He turned a little as if he were surprised. "About when you want to go." "But I don't want to go." "Why not?" "I like my work at the convent. I think I'm making myself useful. I should prefer to stay as long as you do. I think I should tell you that in your present condition you are probably more liable to catch any infection that happens to be about." "I like the discreet way you put it," she smiled ironically. "You're not staying for my sake." She hesitated. He little knew that now the strongest emotion he excited in her, and the most unexpected, was pity. "No. You don't love me. I often think I rather bore you. I shouldn't have thought you were the sort of person to put yourself out for a few stuffy nuns and a parcel of Chinese brats." Her lips outlined a smile. "I think it's rather unfair to despise me so much because you made such a mistake in your judgment of me. It's not my fault that you were such an ass. If you're determined to stay, you are of course at liberty to do so. I'm sorry I can't give you the opportunity of being magnanimous." She found it strangely hard to be quite serious with him. As a matter of Fact, you're quite right, it's not only for the orphans that I'm staying. You see, I'm in the peculiar position that I haven't got a soul in the world that I can go to. I know no one who wouldn't think me a nuisance. I know no one who cares a row of pins if I'm alive or dead. He frowned. But he did not frown in anger. We have made a dreadful hash of things, haven't we, he said. Do you still want to divorce me? I don't think I care any more. You must know that by bringing you here I've condoned the offense. I didn't know. You see, I haven't made a study of infidelity. What are we going to do then when we leave here? Are we going on living together? Oh, don't you think we can let the future take care of itself? There was the weariness of death in his voice. Part 58. 2 or 3 days later Waddington fetched Kitty from the convent, for her restlessness had induced her immediately to resume her work, and took her to drink the promised cup of tea with his mistress. Kitty had, on more than one occasion, dined at Waddington's house. It was a square, white and pretentious building, such as the customs build for their officials all over China, and the dining room in which they ate, the drawing room in which they sat, were furnished with prim and solid furniture. They had the appearance of being partly offices and partly hotel. There was nothing homelike in them, and you understood that these houses were merely places of haphazard sojourn to their successive occupants. It would never have occurred to you that on an upper floor, mystery and perhaps romance dwelt shrouded. They ascended a flight of stairs and Waddington opened a door. Kitty went into a large, bare room, with whitewashed walls on which hung scrolls in various calligraphies. At a square table, on a stiff armchair, both of black wood and heavily carved, sat the Manchu. She rose as Kitty and Waddington entered, but made no step forward. "Here she is," said Waddington, and added something in Chinese. Kitty shook hands with her. She was slim in her long embroidered gown, and somewhat taller than Kitty, used to the southern people, had expected. She wore a jacket of pale green silk with tight sleeves that came over her wrists, and on her black hair, elaborately dressed, was the headdress of the Manchu women. Her face was coated with powder, and her cheeks from the eyes to the mouth heavily rouged. Her plucked eyebrows were a thin dark line, and her mouth was scarlet. From this mask her black, slightly slanting, large eyes burned like lakes of liquid jet. She seemed more like an idol than a woman. Her movements were slow and assured. Kitty had the impression that she was slightly shy but very curious. She nodded her head 2 or 3 times, looking at Kitty, while Waddington spoke of her. Kitty noticed her hands. They were preternaturally long, very slender, of the color of ivory, and the exquisite nails were painted. Kitty thought she had never seen anything so lovely as those languid and elegant hands. They suggested the breeding of uncounted centuries. She spoke a little, in a high voice, like the twittering of birds in an orchard, and Waddington, translating, told Kitty that she was glad to see her. How old was she, and how many children had she got? They sat down on 3 straight chairs at the square table, and a boy brought in bowls of tea, pale and scented with jasmine. The Manchu lady handed Kitty a green tin of 3 Castle cigarettes. Beside the table and the chairs the room contained little furniture. There was a wide pallet bed, on which was an embroidered headrest and 2 sandalwood chests. "What does she do with herself all day long?" asked Kitty. "She paints a little, and sometimes she writes a poem. But she mostly sits. She smokes, but only in moderation, which is fortunate, since one of my duties is to prevent the traffic in opium." "Do you smoke?" asked Kitty. "Seldom. To tell you the truth, I much prefer whiskey. There was in the room a faintly acrid smell. It was not unpleasant, but peculiar and exotic. Tell her that I am sorry I cannot talk to her. I am sure we have many things to say to one another. When this was translated to the Manchu, she gave Kitty a quick glance in which there was the hint of a smile. She was impressive as she sat, without embarrassment, in her beautiful clothes, and from the painted face the eyes looked out wary, self-possessed, and unfathomable. She was unreal, like a picture, and yet had an elegance which made Kitty feel all thumbs. Kitty had never paid anything but passing and somewhat contemptuous attention to the china in which fate had thrown her. It was not done in her set. Now she seemed on a sudden to have an inkling of something remote and mysterious. Here was the East, immemorial, dark and inscrutable. The beliefs and the ideals of the West seemed crude beside ideals and beliefs of which in this exquisite creature she seemed to catch a fugitive glimpse. Here was a different life, lived on a different plane. Kitty felt strangely that the sight of this idol, with her painted face and slanting, wary eyes, made the efforts and the pains of the everyday world she knew slightly absurd. That colored mask seemed to hide the secret of an abundant, profound, and significant experience. Those long, delicate hands with their tapering fingers held the key of riddles undivined. "What does she think about all day long?" asked Kitty. "Nothing," smiled Waddington. "She's wonderful. Tell her I've never seen such beautiful hands. I wonder what she sees in _you_. Waddington, smiling, translated the question. "She says I'm good." "As if a woman ever loved a man for his virtue," Kitty mocked. The Manchu laughed but once. This was when Kitty, for something to say, expressed admiration of a jade bracelet she wore. She took it off and Kitty, trying to put it on, found, though her hands were small enough, that it would not pass over her knuckles. Then the Manchu burst into childlike laughter. She said something to Waddington and called for an amma. She gave her an instruction and the amma in a moment brought in a pair of very beautiful Manchu shoes. "She wants to give you these if you can wear them," said Waddington. "You'll find they make quite good bedroom slippers." "They fit me perfectly," said Kitty, not without satisfaction. But she noticed a roguish smile on Waddington's face. "Are they too big for her?" she asked quickly. "Miles." Kitty laughed, and when Waddington translated, the Manchu and the amma laughed also. When Kitty and Waddington, a little later, were walking up the hill together, she turned to him with a friendly smile. "You did not tell me that you had a great affection for her. What makes you think I have?" "I saw it in your eyes." "It's strange, it must be like loving a phantom. Or a dream. Men are incalculable. I thought you were like everybody else. And now I feel that I don't know the first thing about you." As they reached the bungalow he asked her abruptly, "Why did you want to see her?" Kitty hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm looking for something and I don't quite know what it is. But I know that it's very important for me to know it, and if I did it would make all the difference. Perhaps the nuns know it. When I'm with them I feel that they hold a secret which they will not share with me. I don't know why it came into my head that if I saw this Manchu woman I should have an inkling of what I am looking for. Perhaps she would tell me if she could." "What makes you think she knows it?" Kitty gave him a sidelong glance, but did not answer. Instead she asked him a question. "Do you know it?" He smiled and shrugged his shoulders. "Tell. Some of us look for the way in opium and some in God, some of us in whiskey and some in love. It is all the same way and it leads no whither. Part 59. Kitty fell again into the comfortable routine of her work, and though in the early morning feeling far from well, she had spirit enough not to let it discompose her. She was astonished at the interest the nuns took in her sisters, who, when she saw them in a corridor, had done no more than bid her good morning, now on a flimsy pretext came into the room in which she was occupied and looked at her, chatting a little, with a sweet and childlike excitement. Sister Saint Joseph told her with a repetition which was sometimes tedious how she had been saying to herself for days past, "Now, I wonder, or, I shouldn't be surprised," and then, when Kitty fainted, there can be no doubt, it jumps to the eyes. She told Kitty long stories of her sister-in-law's confinements, which but for Kitty's quick sense of humor would have been not a little alarming. Sister St. Joseph combined in a pleasant fashion the realistic outlook of her upbringing. A river wound through the meadows of her father's farm, and the poplars that stood on its bank trembled in the faintest breeze, with a charming intimacy with religious things. One day, firmly convinced that a heretic could know nothing of such matters, she told Kitty of the Annunciation. "I can never read those lines in the Holy Writ without weeping," she said. "I do not know why, but it gives me such a funny feeling." And then in French, in words that to Kitty sounded unfamiliar and in their precision a trifle cold, she quoted, "And the angel came in unto her, and said, Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou among women. The mystery of birth blew through the convent like a little fitful wind, playing among the white blossoms of an orchard. The thought that Kitty was with child disturbed and excited those sterile women. She frightened them a little now and fascinated them. They looked upon the physical side of her condition with robust common sense, for they were the daughters of peasants and fishermen, but in their childlike hearts was awe. They were troubled by the thought of her burden, and yet happy and strangely exalted. Sister Saint Joseph told her that they all prayed for her, and Sister Saint Martin had said what a pity it was she was not a Catholic, but the Mother Superior had reproved her. She said that it was possible to be a good woman _unbrave femme she put it, even though one was Protestant and _le bon Dieu would in some way or other arrange all that. Kitty was both touched and diverted by the interest she aroused, but surprised beyond measure when she found that even the Mother Superior, so austere in her saintliness, treated her with a new complaisance. She had always been kind to Kitty, but in a remote fashion. Now she used her with a tenderness in which there was something maternal. Her voice had in it a new and gentle note, and in her eyes was a sudden playfulness, as though Kitty were a child who had done a clever and amusing thing. It was oddly moving. Her soul was like a calm, grey sea rolling majestically, awe-inspiring in its somber greatness, and then suddenly a ray of sunshine made it alert, friendly and gay. Often now in the evening she would come and sit with Kitty. "I must take care that you do not tire yourself, mon enfant she said, making a transparent excuse to herself, "or Dr. Fane will never forgive me. Oh, this British self-control. There he is delighted beyond measure, and when you speak to him of it he becomes quite pale." She took Kitty's hand and patted it affectionately. "Dr. Fane told me that he wished you to go away, but you would not, because you could not bear to leave us. That was kind of you, my dear child, and I want you to know that we appreciate the help you have been to us. But I think that you did not want to leave him either, and that is better, for your place is by his side, and he needs you." "Ah, I do not Know what we should have done without that admirable man. I am glad to think that he has been able to do something for you, said Kitty. You must love him with all your heart, my dear. He is a saint. Kitty smiled and in her heart sighed. There was only one thing she could do for Walter now, and that she could not think how to. She wanted him to forgive her, not for her sake any more, but for his own, for she felt that this alone could give him peace of mind. It was useless to ask him for his forgiveness, and if he had a suspicion that she desired it for his good rather than hers, his stubborn vanity would make him refuse at all costs. It was curious that his vanity now did not irritate her, it seemed natural and only made her sorrier for him, and the only chance was that some unexpected occurrence might throw him off his guard. She had an idea that he would welcome an uprush of emotion which would liberate him from this nightmare of resentment, but that, in his pathetic folly, he would fight when it came with all his might against it. Was it not pitiful that men, tarrying so short a space in a world where there was so much pain, should thus torture themselves?